When it comes to the things of God, we remember that He's the glue, Jesus is, that holds everything together. That He's the way, that every other way isn't the way, and that my way is always going to be a solvent that'll bring me apart. We can either believe the things of God or we can prove the things of God. That truth isn't something that's preached, but it's demonstrated. That grace is free, but truth you're going to have to purchase. And truth will always be a confrontation. And truth is something that always has to be fertilized by the Holy Spirit for it to have any life in it at all. And that everything that's true isn't the truth, because the truth is Christ. And we remember that we haven't arrived, but we left where we were, haven't we? And with every going, there's a leaving. And with every learning, there's an unlearning. So we're doing a bit of unlearning as we go along here. And one of the things that we're saying is this, that Adam was not plan A and Jesus was plan B, but Jesus was always plan A. And of course, if you're in the Middle East, it's an interesting thing when a son goes to his father and he says to his father, I would like to have a bride. And one day, Jesus said to the Father in heaven, I would like to have a bride. And then He comes up with a plan. Let us make man. And in that plan, one day, man is going to become the very bride of God. Isn't that an incredible thing? And so He makes Adam, and Adam is not the completed thing. He's just the thing in process. And God made him in the image of God, because if you're going to have a bride, that bride would have to be in the image of God, wouldn't it? So He makes him in the image of God. And then Adam fails, and God knew that he would fail. He knew what He would do with it. He knew what He would do with the world. And in this fallen world, and in this humanity, and in this condition of flesh, God could go ahead and do what the original plan was, and that is to bring the slain lamb from the foundation of the world, who conquered everything that we would ever have to conquer, who did it as God, and come and dwell in us and make us the children of God, a completely and brand new creation, something much, 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 much better than Adam ever was. And now we go back to heaven as His bride. And you can see why Christ has so much joy. He's done it all. He's the one that bellied up to the bar, and He's the one that made the whole thing happen. Now, what we've been talking about then in the context of that is, that changes how I view my world. I see God in charge of everything. That He isn't fighting Satan, He's using him. He's permitting what He could have prevented, but He does it all for a reason. And in this IQ of 999 trillion, whatever it is, He can work all those things together and make it all work out to good, to produce exactly what He wants to produce. And the beautiful thing about it is, for us, is that we just have a simple commandment called rest. Just rest. And of course, that's the hardest thing that we'll ever do, is He works His plan out and we're resting. Now, we've looked at then how God's using that with the world to push us toward Him, to bring about this spiritual birth, and it's all part of our spiritual pregnancy. But one of the things that's crucial is that we learn to take up the cross and deny ourselves, or our human being, or that fallen nature that we have that would like to take over and control all the time. And we'll talk about why God's left that in us, and that's a perfect plan of His also. Now, as we looked at that, we looked at how God made man, spirit, soul, and body. You're born dead to God in the spirit. It makes you self-centered. It makes you insane. It gives you an image and an identity you get from other self-centered, insane people. Then you're spending your life either changing or maintaining it. It's the whole focus of your life. And in that, you can't cope with the pain of it, so you find idols. And the reason you found idols is that you had a false concept of God. We're created to believe in Him, but we can't believe in Him because of the image that we have of Him from our youth and from the authorities around us. Now, as we begin to look and tie that together, I want to see how that affects relationships around us. But we can approach these relationships from a different position now. I can begin to see God in the relationship. When something goes wrong, or I'm upset with my mate, or I'm upset with a friend, or something is wrong in the church, the first question I'm hoping that we're beginning to ask now is, why did God permit this into my life, and what does He want to teach me first? Because before, when we stand in this system, the first question we ask is, why did you offend me, and you need to change so my flesh will feel better, so I'll be happier. But really, as we go along, and all of you would know this, the interesting thing is that every believer knows the future. And the reason you know the future is you have Christ in you, who is the beginning and the end. And I would really challenge you and say, has anything in your life actually surprised you? Now, you might have been shocked to discover and have a revelation of the love of God. That might have shocked you. But in terms of events in your life as a believer, has anything ever really shocked you? I remember talking to a lady not long ago, her son, a youth worker down in Mexico, and she got a phone call that he was dead in his hotel room. And I asked her a question. I said, "Sister, I want you to just be quiet in your mind and quiet in your emotions and move into your spirit for just a minute, and let me ask you a question. And in your spirit, He'll speak to you, a yes or a no. Didn't you always know your son was going to die young? Yes or no?" And she just looked at me and said, "My husband and I talked about that when he was a small boy, that there was something in me saying he wasn't going to live long." And she said, before he went to Mexico, we had the talk, and he looked at me and said, "Do you know, Mom, I really don't think I'm going to live that long." And she said, "I just kept it quiet." And I said, "Sister, the reason I'm bringing that up is that I want you to see that God numbers our days, and that God is in charge of things. And this wasn't bad luck, and it wasn't bad genetics, and it wasn't a thing, if you wouldn't have let him go to Mexico, this wouldn't have happened," and all those kind of things. Now, that doesn't take away the pain. We know that. But it does give you a peace and a comfort to know that God knows the future, that He knows what's in there. Now, I could ask this question of all of you today. I want you to quiet your mind, and I want you to quiet your emotions. And I'm going to ask you a very simple question. Are you going to end well, yes or no? What does He speak to you? Yes or no? Well, when He speaks the yes in you, what do you got to worry about now? You know that you're going to end well. You already know your future. And now, if you're going to end well, if you hit a dip along the way, the dip is not a hindrance for you ending well. The dip comes because there's something in you that is going to make you miserable if God doesn't bring it out and work on it. So what we want to do, of course, is kill the messenger. You've got a cancer in you, and someone needs to dig it out and bring it to the top so God can deal with it. And He's going to use a situation around you to do that. But what we do is that we want to kill the messenger, the person that's digging it out of me. He's only digging it out of the love of God, and that's what we've been talking about, because He knows if this thing continues, it's going to make you a very unhappy person. And He's beginning to work in the order of things. So we look at relationships and we look at life differently. And as something happens, the first thing I do is say, what is He trying to share with me? What's He trying to do with me? This whole system should make us look at the world in a different way and see that everything is working for you. If God is for you, then who can be against you? We have to approach relationships that way, or we'll be undone as we continue to try to change other people's behavior. Do you know that He gave you the exact children at the exact time to do an exact thing in your life? That He gave you the exact mate that you needed at an exact time to do something exact in your life? That He gave you a situation that was exact. Everything is exact because He's working and has every hair of your head numbered. Now that changes then how I approach relationships. I look at this, and I'm just using marriage as an example, but it can be any relationship, those we have in the church, those we have with others. But every marriage or every relationship comes to a place where there's a Y in the road and a choice has to be made. And that choice is this. Am I going to go to the left and live in fantasy and focus on my mate, make them my God, and make happiness my goal? And of course today what we're doing is we're looking for someone who's a soulmate, And we want to find someone who does everything we do and likes what we like and never disagrees with us, does all the same things. And we want them to think the way we do, feel the way we do. Our goal is happiness. We have to be compatible. There's heaps of books on that. When in reality, incompatibility is the greatest grounds for oneness, not compatibility. But in the flesh, you want someone just like your flesh. And all that does is end in disaster. Now, we can make another choice, and that choice is to say this: the purpose of marriage is to make me miserable. Now, it'll only make me as miserable as I'm self-centered. So it's going to reveal my self-centeredness, and it's going to bring it out of me, and I'm going to go to the right. And I've said this: my goal in my marriage is to keep my focus on Christ and reality, and my satisfaction is going to come from the Lord. And as I go this way, marriage is going to hammer my pride, isn't it? It's going to make me turn to Him. It's going to cut away all of my self-centeredness. But I've kept in mind that my goal is Christ, and it's going to lead to joy that'll continue. Betty and I have had this talk, and we've just said in the last half of our lives, we're in this agreement that the reason we're in this isn't to be happy. We're in it to know Christ for the revelation of Him. That's what we want out of the whole thing. And that's where we're headed. So we have a different mindset as we approach relationships. Now I'm going to move forward for a minute and then just back for a minute just to clarify where I want to head and what we're doing. But as we look at relationships, there's two bags that you're carrying into every relationship. And in one bag is my unique self, and the other bag is my flesh life. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is that there's a little bit of confusion, and I'm sure you've been confused also. When someone says to you that self needs to be crucified, and then we're told that self needs to be denied, and then we're told that self ought to be loved. Well, what are you supposed to do with the thing? And it's really confusing to me when you say, first of all, that it's been crucified, and then all of a sudden you turn right around and say it has to be denied. Well, if it's dead, how can I deny it? And then on top of all that, someone wants me to love it. Well, all of that's a bit confusing. And we want to separate those things this morning and take a look at them and see what the self is that's crucified, the self is that's denied, and the one that we love. But when we come into a relationship, or we come into this room this morning, everyone in this room is carrying two invisible bags. And in one bag is your past life, your flesh life, your humanity, and in the other bag is your uniqueness, how God made you. Now, God isn't in the cookie-cutting business, so He doesn't make everybody the same, and anyone with children knows that God doesn't make people the same. And we're going to be looking at that quite a bit this morning. He makes each person unique. So we have our own uniqueness. And what we'll be looking at then is that God made you out of the dust of the earth. He breathed His Spirit. You became a living soul. The soul is the seat or the place of your uniqueness. And in that, you have the mind and the will and the emotions. And so basically, we're going to look at three types of people. People who live in their mind that are thinkers, people who live in their willpower who are doers, and people who live in their emotions who are feelers. You can't change how He made you. You're not going to be able to do that because that is your own uniqueness. Now, what that causes then is a bit of conflict because each of these three people see the world differently. And the question will be, how do you see the world and how do the people around you see the world? So a simple example that I use is that Betty's a thinker. If you're married to a thinker, you know this, that the look you see most often on their face is just this one. Because if there's a pause, their mind gets busy and you don't know where they're going, and they'll be bored and they'll go up and play in the biggest playground in the world, which is up in their head. And so they'll just be staring straight ahead. You don't know where they're at, what they're thinking about, or where they've gone. When a thinker is quiet, they're generally what? Thinking. Now, I'm a feeler, and feelers marry thinkers. But for me, when I'm quiet, I'm angry. So Betty and I get married. We go out on our honeymoon. I'm talking. I ask her a question. I look at her, and she's staring straight ahead. Well, what do I assume? I assume that she's angry. But she isn't angry. She's just thinking. And I take it as rejection because I'm completely self-centered. And now, because she's rejecting and hurting me, I've got to reject her back and hurt her, as if that's going to fix anything. So I'm thinking about a punishment. But see, in my mindset as a feeler, I'm only going to think of a punishment that would hurt me the most. I'm not a thinker, so I don't even know what would hurt a thinker. I don't know that what would hurt a thinker is to spend the rest of the day with the diagrams at this angle. They couldn't handle that. Their neck would be going, trying to get me to twist it back the whole time. Now that would be punishment for a thinker. I'll just leave them like that. But I'm not a thinker, I'm a feeler. So I come up with a punishment that would hurt me the most, which is to not talk to her. So I spend the next week of the honeymoon not talking to her, punishing her. And the thing is, she's finally enjoying the honeymoon because I shut up. So now you've got a conflict in this personality that we don't even understand. Then on top of that, we have a conflict that comes in because of our past lives. That you're bringing things into a marriage that you don't know that you're bringing in. And there's certain things that you do that on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 1 for you, but it's a 10 for your mate, and you have no idea why. And sometimes I've had people at conferences come up and rebuke me, and they're so angry about something I said. And I'll be perfectly honest, I do try to listen to those kind of things and refine things and be clear, but there are times when they leave and I know no more about what they were talking about than when they came. I just don't understand. I hit some hot button. One lady accused me of actually calling ahead and finding out that she was never able to get pregnant and then emphasizing children to hurt her. I didn't even know the woman. It was just an impossibility that I'd done that. But obviously, in the things I was saying, I was hitting some real hot buttons. And so if I had a typical example of this, is that you can have a lot of women who've grown up in a family with a dominant mother. And their concept of marriage is who's in charge, the husband or the wife. Well, the only thing they've seen is the mom in charge. And now they're Christians and they'd like their husband to take over. But they really wouldn't like him to take over. So you get this message, would you please take over, but I'm scared to death when you do. I've never seen a man lead. And so you can be married to the 2 best women in the world. You just don't know who you woke up with. Does she want me to take over or not to take over? That's something we bring in from our past that's a collision. I give this example. My mother would have me clean the house. If I missed one thing, I had to clean the whole thing again. And it always seemed that I missed one thing. So one day, Betty says to me, we've got a lot of company, the house is dirty, we don't have any food, I'm going to go to the market. Well, while she's gone, I clean the whole house and I go like a rocket through there. Because a feeler doesn't clean the house because he's sick of the dirt. A feeler cleans the house to be a people pleaser. I'm only cleaning the house to get a pat on the back and the praise. I'm not doing it because I can't stand it anymore. And so I go through the house and I'm going like mad, the sweat's rolling off my forehead. I get the bathrooms clean, get the rugs clean, get the floor done, everything, and I hear the car coming, so I know Betty's going to be here any minute. I can't wait for her to come in. She was so far behind, and now she's going to discover how far ahead she is and come over and give me a big hug and be pleased. And she walks in the door carrying the groceries and looks around, and I'm waiting for the look on her face of delight, and she says, "You missed that over there." Now, it's a fact that I did, and thinkers love to tell you the truth without emotion. You know, they don't say, "Betty, how do you like the shirt?" Well, it makes you look fat. You know, it'd be nice if there was a little sugar on it, and she said, "Do you know I like your other shirt a little better?" That'd be a little nicer way to say it. But if a thinker loves truth, so they assume you like it. Well, I don't like it that well. I'd rather be told that other shirt looks a little better. I'd rather be massaged a little bit. And so she comes in and says, "Well, you missed that." Now, it's Betty talking, but whose voice am I hearing? I'm hearing my mom's voice. And Betty gets a reaction out of me that she can't believe. I stomp off and go into the room and close the door, and I don't talk to her the rest of the day. And she's completely baffled by that because she doesn't even understand what's happened. But it was a collision of things from the past. And then there's collisions that take place between my uniqueness, how God created me, and my past. And so one of the things is, if I would try to talk to my mother, she would often walk off. Well, when Betty's doing something, she's obsessed on that one thing, and I can be talking to her and she'll walk right off and not even respond. And it took me years to stop her and ask her, and she said, "What? I never even heard what you said. I was thinking about doing this, this, or this." And I took that then as rejection. Now, what happens at this point is that we look at a person's behavior and we attach a motive to that behavior. But one behavior can have two motives. So I could get down, I could go over to Scott, and I could hit Scott in the chest. And you have to decide, why did I hit him? Did I hit him because he was choking, or did I hit him because I was angry? One behavior has two motives. And so what we do in the relationships around us, because we don't understand this, is that we're constantly attaching motives to people's behavior, and we're judging them, and we're getting the thing completely wrong. We're missing the whole thing. So one of the things that happens is, at the end of spending a year, maybe a month, maybe it's 10 years with a person, how well do you really know that person? I mean, do you think that people actually get married, say "I do," and walk down the aisle, and as they're walking down the aisle, they're plotting the destruction of their mate? Do you think that's what they're doing? I see in my office, I feel like I see some of the best-hearted people in the world that come and in brokenness and humility and just say, we'd like our marriage to work. And I know that those people have not been plotting and planning all of these years to make the other person miserable. Now, I'll confess to this, I do make Betty miserable, but it's not my plan to make her miserable. I know there's things that take place, but it's not what I'm plotting and planning. I know it's not what you plot or plan. We don't want that kind of turmoil in our lives, and we're not trying to make things end at that point. That's not what we're doing. But it happens because of these two bags that we carry and the false judgments that we make. Now, I like to talk about the thing that's caused me the most joy in life, and that is the continued revelation of Christ and the abiding life in Him and me being a branch on the vine. But the thing that's caused me the most misery in my life is my false judgment of the people around me and the situations and people in churches and my own family members. That's caused the most turmoil in my whole life. They tell a story in England. Actually, it's not a story. I've been there. It's a castle. And the name of the castle is Bethgallen. And on the side of the castle is the story about Bethgallen. It's in Wales. And they say that's the land of castles. There's more castles there than any other place in the world. And the story of the castle is on the castle wall. And what it just simply says is this. The king had a dog, and his name was Bethgallen. And he loved that dog as a man. It was his best friend. And every day he would call for the dog. They'd lower the drawbridge, and they would go out and go hunting. Then the king would come back, and he would go to his only son's room. He had a young son about 4 or 5 years old. He would give him a hug and a kiss and awaken him. And one morning the king got up, and he called for Bethgallen. The bridge was already down, but there was no Bethgallen. So he went hunting on his own. He came back, he called for Bethgallen, he couldn't find him. So he went up to his son's room to awaken him, and when he got in the room, what he saw made his heart sink. Because the bed that his son slept in was covered in blood. And he went and he just stood there looking at it, and blood was everywhere. It was all over the walls and all over the floor. And as he's standing there staring at it, he feels something at his feet and looks down, and there's Bethgallen. And Bethgallen's covered in blood. And the king knew exactly what had happened. Beth Gallen was jealous of his son. And whenever he would hug his son, and you've seen a dog do this, the dog would often push his head in between and try to get between him, and the dog would growl at the son. And the king had wondered at that behavior before and hadn't done anything. And now he knew exactly what had happened because Beth Gallen had killed his son, his only son. So he took out his sword, and in a rage, he slew Beth Gallen, and in one blow he was cut in two and dead. The instant Beth Gallen fell dead, the king heard another sound coming from the bed. He walked over to the bed, and he looked under the bed, and there was his son unharmed, hiding, with a dead wolf lying beside him. The Beth Gallen had killed the wolf, and the king had killed Beth Gallen. It said that the king picked up Beth Gallen, he took him to the courtyard, and he buried him there, and there's a grave to Beth Gallen, and he changed the name of the castle to Beth Gallen, and he changed the name of the city. And it said the king was never seen smiling again because he'd killed his best friend. If only he'd waited 5 minutes, if only he'd waited 10 minutes, if only he would have judged his judgment and paused, but he knew all about it, didn't he? He knew exactly what was going on. He knew exactly what was happening. And how often do I ride along in the car or take a walk and I'm obsessing on the behavior of another person, and I know exactly what they're plotting, and I know exactly what they're planning, and I know exactly what they're doing, and I make my judgment and I kill them with the sword that's my tongue. I mean, I've come home that many times, and I remember one time just saying, coming in the house, and Betty, how was your day today? Fine. Well, I immediately just took the sword out of my mouth and slew her. She's not going to talk to me that way. And later on in the day, I find out that one of her friends had died. And she was under pressure from that. See, we never know what's going on with people, but we assume we do. And it's all part of playing God that we can make those kind of judgments. Only God's judgments are right. And of course, you've all run into this, and people will say, and there is the righteous judgment. There's the righteous judgments of God. And that's what we're sharing with people. So I don't let the homosexual tell me that I'm judging them and I'm critical. I'm not judging you. That's not my judgment. I never said that. I'm only telling you what God said. I'm not letting the liar say I'm judging them. No, if you're doing that, that's what God said. So we can point people to Him, and those are righteous judgments. But our judgments will always be a distorted judgment because of these two bags that we're carrying.